Awesome. Let's get started. So you guys are in the 1 p.m., one of the 1 p.m. workshops. This one is called Protecting Data Privacy, a Planned Parenthood Health Tech Story and Exercise. We are joined today by two of our workshop hosts, Miriam and Katie. Miriam is a product manager for Spot On, Planned Parenthood's period and birth control tracking app. She's committed to building products that center unrepresented users, solving pain points and questions that are often overlooked. We are also joined by Katie. Katie is the manager of digital customer experience on Planned Parenthood's innovation team. She leads the customer support program for Spot On and is fiercely committed to user advocacy and ethical technology. We're also supported here in the shadows by Umbreen. Umbreen is the National Director of Innovation for Planned Parenthood. She will be answering questions live in the chat as Katie and Miriam present. Please feel welcome to introduce yourselves in the chat, and I will hand it over to Miriam and Katie.
Awesome. Thank you, Myra. As Myra said, would love to see more introductions in the chat. So we are so excited to have you all for this workshop and didn't realize that this would be the first round of workshops. So hope there's a lot of energy in general about what's to come. Today, we're going to be talking about protecting data privacy, a Planned Parenthood health tech story and exercise. So we'll dig into data privacy together a little bit today. So my name is Miriam, as was already mentioned. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the product manager for Spot On, which is Planned Parenthood Federation of America's period and birth control tracking mobile app. And for some visual description, I am wearing an orange shirt with a necklace. I have some hoop earrings on. I have white skin and brown curly hair up in a bun.
Thanks, Miriam, and thanks, Myra. My name is Katie Delamora. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the manager of digital customer experience on Spot On. To describe myself, I'm wearing a blue linen shirt with small hoop earrings. I have white skin, long dark brown hair, and hazel eyes. And as we mentioned, we're also pleased to have our colleague in the chat today, Umbreen Molitor, National Director of Innovation at PPFA. So as we present, Umbreen will be available to respond to any questions or comments that in the chat. As due to time, our workshop won't have a live Q&A at the end.
Okay, so let's get into it. We wanted to spotlight our little app, Spot On, before we continue. Spot On is Planned Parenthood's 6-year-old period and birth control tracking app, and it's developed for folks to prevent pregnancy. It provides sexual health and reproductive care education inside the app as resources. It allows users to track different forms of birth control accurately with discrete reminders, and it empowers folks to make their own reproductive health decisions and how they track on the app. So we wanted to give it a minute here because we think Spot On has some really interesting and unique sort of value adds from other period and health trackers in the market, in that, as we mentioned, it is a period tracking app that helps people prevent pregnancy. That makes us stand out. The app is free. It has a localized Spanish app developed for and by Spanish speakers called Spot On en Español. So if your device language is set to Spanish, you will see that automatically in the App Store. And it allows users to track anonymously without an account, which we will get to. That came up. That was a popular theme last year for us. It's inclusive, both in its language and its color. So you won't see pink. You won't see mentions of women. And that was a very intentional design choice for us. And then really importantly, it includes integrations with other Planned Parenthood digital products right in the app itself.
So we're really excited about this workshop format at Women in Product because we want this to feel interactive and hear from you all too. So here's what we have planned for you all today. Our workshop's going to have a few different components. First, we'll have you investigate your own personal relationship with your digital health data through a couple of thought exercises. Then we'll set the scene and discuss the gender data gap and how that has impacted women's health research. Then we'll share a case study from summer 2022 and how the Spot On team addressed the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Supreme Court leak, and the decision. You'll hear how our team tackled data privacy concerns at a pivotal moment for Planned Parenthood's health centers, patients, and users. And then lastly, we'll lead you in reflection activities. This is the interactive part, to think about how to apply some of today's lessons to your own product context. So a little note about participation. We want to stress that participation in all polls and activities we do today is completely optional. If you'd like to just listen and treat this like a podcast, feel free. But if you're up for participating more, we'd love to hear from you. So we'll start with a couple polls and chat questions, but later on, when we have time together to share, we'll invite folks up to the stage. And if you want to turn your cameras on and speak out loud, that'll be great. We'd love to hear from you. Next slide, please. So let's do a pulse check. Before we dig into the content today, we wanted to open up and talk about data privacy. Again, totally optional poll. We know we have a lot of product leaders and technology experts in the room, so we're curious to see where folks stand on digital health tracking in this present moment. So you can go ahead at the right side of your screen, and there is a polls feature, and you'll see the first poll there on the right, and that is, do you use at least one digital health tracker? Yes or no? So if you want to answer, go ahead and submit a response. And keep in mind, this can be anything and everything. Mobile tracking apps like period tracking, meditation apps count, exercise apps, or wearables like Fitbit, Apple Watch. I'm gonna go ahead and put mine in here too. And then tell us in the chat too, because we'd love to hear. If you answered yes, which ones do you use? And if you answered no, if you want to share, why not?
And it looks like when you submit your answers, you'll be able to see the answers populate, which is super interesting. It looks like we have 17 votes for yes, which is 77% of us have at least one digital health tracker, and five votes, 22%, said no. So would love to know, as Katie said, initial feedback on that. Are you kind of surprised? And then more information on some of the ones that you use.
Yeah, this is kind of what we expected as well for what people are answering.
Okay. Yes, we have some great chats coming in. Okay. I will keep it moving, but would love to keep that conversation going. So we have a second poll. So this poll is for the folks who answered yes in the previous question. But of course, if you just want to see answers, feel free to participate however you'd like. So we'd like to know, if you answered yes, that you do use a digital health tracker, what actions have you taken to protect your digital health data in the past year? So you have to select one. So we know that you might use more than one tracker, and you may or may not have done more of these actions. But for the sake of this experiment, let's just choose one digital health tracker. So some of the options, or the options that we have in the poll, are: 1, I read the privacy policy. 2, I turned off location services or geo tracking. I continued to use the app, but without an account. I did not use my email or phone number. I deleted an app because I no longer felt comfortable using it. And then finally, I didn't change the way I used the app. So let me go and choose one. Okay, these are interesting.
Yeah, looks like almost 46% right now turned off location services or geo tracking.
And we got coming in next, I didn't change the way I use the app, which is 36% of us. And would love in the chat to get any, did that surprise you? Have you done multiple of those actions? Is this question, like, what's coming up with this question? I know I sort of had a lot of thoughts as I was thinking through this, like, oh God, I don't think I changed the way I use most of my apps, which in itself, super interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that also can go into this. We know, like, maybe your identity or your upbringing, cultural background can also play into what you want to share too, especially with health tracking.
Yes. Okay, feel free to keep going with those polls in chat, and we will, just for the sake of time, continue to move through this.
Yes. So first, we want to start with some context setting around the gender data gap. But we do have one call out before we dive in, though, about gender. So you'll hear us refer to women or men's health data in this workshop. But keep in mind, we're using the word women because most health research was conducted in a way that incorrectly acknowledges only a gender binary and lacks inclusion. Societally today, we want to acknowledge there's not a gender binary, there's a gender spectrum. And as we think about the future and the change that we want to see, especially at Planned Parenthood, it's important for that research language to be more inclusive because we aren't then limited to what the existing research explores.
So before we get into our case study, we think it's really important to understand the current environment we're in and the opportunity that all of us in this room have to fill in a crucial gap to represent everyone that is sharing this space with us. So what do we mean when we say gender data gap? And we have a definition up on the screen. The data that we've collected as a society has historically reflected only men's experience. Products are designed from this data, which means that most things are designed for a man as default. So herein lies a clear product opportunity for us all. So what does the gender data gap actually look like? You might already have some ideas swirling in your head. You might have read books, listened to podcasts on this. Thankfully, this is a topic that is becoming sort of more spoken about in the larger society. But you can see here, for all intents and purposes, what we really sort of define it as exclusion happening at all of these different stages of the research pipeline. This could be academic research, industry research, you name it, it's probably there. And so you can see here the research pipeline, and I'm not going to read this whole slide, but I think this is a super interesting graphic to show you. It starts at the pre-data generation, so all of the stuff that's included before the research has even begun, all the way through to the data analysis. And so what is the impact of this exclusion? We have a couple examples that are pretty stark and are really important for us to share today. The first one is the 2020 COVID vaccine efficacy trials. Those are a really good example of this. There were 0 pregnant and lactating individuals included in phase 1 of the COVID-19 vaccine trials. And that's those people who knew that they were pregnant. Women, trans, and non-binary individuals have historically been left out of the research pipeline due to a variety of reasons. Oftentimes, people who are pregnant, on their period, breastfeeding, or taking medication like birth control are opted out of these trials because these experiences bring upon more variables to the test. And when you're testing, you want to eliminate as many variables as possible to test A versus B. So that inherently makes it hard for many to be a part of these trials. So instead of opting out, we should fund research that specifies these nuances. And then the second example of this exclusion that really shows this impact shows that it is only magnified when we talk about people who aren't white and aren't cisgendered. And cisgender is defined as a person whose gender identity corresponds to the sex registered to them at birth. There are many, many statistics that prove this out. If you just go into Google, you can find a ton of really clear examples of this exclusion and its impact. But one important one we want to call out here today is that the maternal death rate for Black women is 2.6 times higher than white women. So how might this directly relate to your work? Luckily, we are in a room full of people that have the ability to make decisions that can alter this narrative. Hopefully the workshops, the exercises from today and the talks have only just proved that out. It's important that we consider how this manifests in our own research initiatives, whether it's health related or another industry. For example, what participants are we using for usability trials? What language do we use when we write in-app surveys, for example, or UX writing in general? What accessibility standards are we building into our products? There are a lot of relatively small ways that we can increase our inclusion and our accessibility to have a large impact.
Speaking of that direct impact, digital tools and technology are crucial to help us bridge this gender data gap. For healthcare, definitely, but for many other industries as well, because digital tools can facilitate remarkable data collection that contributes to research, science, product development. For example, by providing larger sample sizes, Also getting researchers access to information that would be otherwise inaccessible. For example, passive tracking, because it relies on a user being physically present for a trial or study, but now they can just enter information from their pocket, more accessibility. Also, it represents a wider swath of experiences to be more inclusive. So digital tools can also help women, trans, and non-binary individuals particularly feel greater autonomy, empowerment, and satisfaction. So when we speak about the health industry specifically, this could look like users feel curious about and in control of their health, positive impact on one's health management and their relationship to health, and improve communication with healthcare providers, which is super important for us at Spot On. So that's really important for everyone to feel safe, educated, and included. Next slide, please. Thanks. Still, it's not easy. It's not as simple as, great, we have all the digital tools at our disposal. Let's just collect as much data as we can from people. It's really important to strike the balance between the different themes we've been discussing here. One, users have a right to privacy, and we have a duty to protect them. Two, if collecting data, let's be thoughtful and intentional. And three, take a beat. As product leaders, consult those on our team. Is this info really needed for discovery, research, and product development and feature building?
Okay, so we know that was a lot. Hopefully that got the juices flowing and you already have some thoughts, and I'm seeing some chatter in the chat. Before we get into how our team navigated that sensitive balance, we want to take a beat, like Katie said, and we want to give you all some thought starters to apply to your own work and your experience. So we'd love for you to put the answers in the chat. We'll try to skim it, but we'll have Imbrain in the chat. And in general, we'd love to have you talk to each other about this, or write these questions down. I believe you should get them after the fact, and just think about them later. Put them in your back pocket. So some of the questions, some food for thought is, do you yourself have any upcoming tests or research on your team, or maybe at your work in general? How do you address diversity of experiences and ensure inclusive research? What audience might your industry exclude simply because you've assumed it isn't your target demographic? Okay, so like I said, we will keep moving, but would love to hear your thoughts on that, either now or after the fact.
Yeah, someone mentioned also the book, Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. That is a great read as well. All right, so now we're going to talk about our product Spot On last summer. We thought that providing context on the data gender gap was really important before we dive into the details of our case study, because it shows some of the factors that we were up against and responsible for as product owners of a reproductive and sexual health mobile app. So we want to share details of the experience that our team on Spot On had last summer, from the Supreme Court leak of a federal level abortion case ruling to present day. And just a quick reminder, take a deep breath, take care of yourself, as scenes from last year when Roe was overturned will be discussed in the next few slides.
Yes, okay. So let's get into it. So on May 2nd, 2022, we learned about a Supreme Court ruling prematurely that was not in favor of abortion continuing to be a federal level right. In the days after the SCOTUS decision was leaked, conversation online turned towards period tracking apps, as well as other digital tools that collect information about your health. I'm sure some of you might have been following those conversations. Over the next month, tweets, TikToks, and articles about deleting period apps gained steam and went viral. We were seeing many folks speculate on what could happen. The campaign for data privacy and stakes heightened rapidly. So prior to this, of course, Planned Parenthood Federation of America had been preparing, but now it was all hands on deck, especially on PPFA's user-facing digital product teams.
After the SCOTUS leak happened the first week of May, we received an influx of inquiries from Spot On users on all our platforms, on other Planned Parenthood digital products like our chat program, from social media and affiliate health centers. So patients, users, and the general public were asking if their data was safe. Providers were writing to us to ask how to guide their patients with data privacy and spot on. And at this point, the general user sentiment that we were hearing on the ground was the quote that you see on this slide. Folks wanted to know, point blank, is their data safe? So something really interesting, although heartbreaking, that we noticed was that whereas before users were deeply concerned about data loss and backing up and preserving their health data, the sentiment had rapidly changed overnight. Now the sentiment was delete everything as fast as you can. So we had to react quickly using tools that we had at the ready. And we knew that we didn't sell data, we never would, and we had infrastructure to protect our users. Another thing is we had the option for users to track anonymously on Spot On without registered accounts. So that was important to some users. So from an emotional intelligence place and being on the front lines, we really felt the need to reassure folks and protect them as best as we could. But we also knew we had to act fast. So here are all the actions we took within the first 72 hours of the SCOTUS leak.
Okay, so as you can imagine, it really was a full 360 effort, all hands on deck, as we said. It started with conversations led by Katie and myself, the product and customer support leads, and eventually, very quickly, it spanned to over a half dozen teams internally. Because of the high stakes of this, it allowed folks more buy-in than usual, so they could point out red flags or give guidance. So it was really important that we had all of these people on the ground floor before we made any moves. So we collaborated with our usual internal stakeholders, CX, our design team, our developers, quality assurance, and then digital products and innovation leadership. But we also worked with more stakeholders from the larger org, like legal and communications, info security, application development. And ultimately, one of our first actions was to create a statement, a formal statement that answered the question that Katie just shared. What's happening to my data? Are you all protecting my data? And so we wrote blogs, and by we, it really was that joint effort. We wrote blogs that both in English and in Spanish that were created with this aligned messaging. And they addressed the question explicitly of how is Spot On protecting my data? And then we began to surface this message everywhere a user could interact with it, creating all the additional touch points. And you can see on the screen, you can still find these online. These were what the blog posts look like. So after we aligned on this messaging and we got our first statement out, it was really time to quickly disseminate and integrate all of the messaging. So using all of our digital tools in our content spaces. So the first thing we did was inside the Spot On app. We created a pop-up inside the app that linked to these blog posts explicitly, and you can see those in red on the left in both English and Spanish, depending on whether they were using Spot On in Espanol or Spot On in English, on first launch of the app. So it was really, really important for us that they essentially didn't have a choice, that they got this immediately, and they could either press learn more, which would open up these blogs, or they could press got it, I'm good, and that would dismiss the window. And then similarly on the right side, we have editorial content inside our app. And so we took up the content space to prioritize this blog. So it was that first article on the top of our content on the home screen. So it was pretty difficult for users to not see it. And one thing that I want to point out here that I think is really interesting is we went back and forth at this point on whether we should put the pop-up in at all, knowing that the vast majority of our users hadn't reached out to us and expressed concerns. Would putting something proactively out there actually stir up and stoke more fear and anxiety when there otherwise wasn't any? But ultimately, we decided that proactive, responsible communication and transparency was what our brand stands for, and that in order to continue being a trustworthy product, this was an important stand for us to take. So you can imagine other scenarios where this might be the case and sort of having to weigh the proactivity versus responsiveness and the risks and rewards that sort of come from the decisions you make there. And then just finally, how did we get the messaging out to the world, essentially? We worked with our media, our comms and social team to get that brand messaging out on all of our social channels. Our brand's message is still care no matter what. Our intentions were to build trust on the ground, and all of this legwork was done even before the Dobbs decision dropped. So this was happening, like we mentioned, at the leak. We got a proactive social media post up about why you can trust us on all of our major social channels, and you can see that on the screen. And we started to see our peer apps doing similar things and beginning to make company statements about user privacy.
So on the support side, we put forth a lot of effort as well to directly reach out to the users. We created many iterative systems to respond to users at scale at various touch points, because by this point we were seeing hundreds of tickets come in overnight. So we created bilingual content for the app stores, for our canned responses when folks are writing to us in email, frequently asked questions, and our auto replies for when we were offline and we wanted to reassure folks and we weren't able to answer right in the moment. So these were approved and shared with our social media team, our chat programs, and also affiliate health centers, because that could also help reassure folks who didn't have access to the app or didn't have access to email and who were calling and asking questions in person. So we had an aligned message there, and we gave folks info on how their data was processed and specifically let them know their data was never sold. So we reiterated that message to create a sense of reassurance here for our users. We also created case categories to capture quantitative information. And this is really important because we tracked categories for how people were responding to us, how many people were asking specifically about data privacy, how many people needed help or care around the abortion laws. So all these systems allowed us to quickly respond to a large volume with our small team, provide empathetic reassurance, and then rapidly change our messaging and education as more policies and news changed by the hour. So here's where we get to the data piece as well, because real-time data collection, reporting, and analysis was a key part of this entire process. Like we mentioned before, we collected minimal data. We kept it anonymous when we could, but we gained so many insights, and that also helped us plan for the future of our product beyond last summer. So one of the first things we did, is you can see pictured on the screen here, we created an optional offboarding survey for users. This was for after our interaction with them. We used that opportunity to gain more information, but also measure their real-time sentiment. So they had a blank box where they could enter in how they were feeling. So that could inform the actions we continued to take. If they wanted to share, this was of course optional and anonymous. So CX led measuring user sentiment on the ground by also reporting out these user stories in real time. And then, like Miriam mentioned, surveying other competitors' actions in the digital health landscape. We shared that out to our teams. So we did this qualitatively and quantitatively. Qualitatively, we created Slack channels and provided data storytelling documents, and this helped for larger narrative sharing for leadership at a quick glance. And then quantitatively, we had some high-level PPFA internal data dashboards where we set up where we could drop quick numbers, top comments, user sentiments with CX case categories, the number of App Store downloads and installs, and App Store reviews, so that folks inside the org could check and keep a pulse on what we were seeing, since everything was happening quite quickly. So here we see the quantitative impact and the positive user response from all of the actions that we took in those 72 hours. The high level of customer satisfaction, which was 97% over the summer, amidst that high volume of tickets, which we saw 157% increase from the 90 days before, and new app stalls from new users that were new to the product. So our products team's rapid response led to reestablishment of user trust, which is so important to us, and allowing more users, especially the new app users that were coming to Spot On for the first time, to benefit from the app and its main functions, period, and birth control tracking. So thanks to our proactivity up front, our team was prepared when Roe was ultimately overturned a couple months later on June 24th last year by the Supreme Court, and we were able to work more efficiently and iteratively to respond in the moment. So this is the qualitative impact of our actions. we're observing a gradual positive shift in user sentiment over time. So as a result of our direct actions, in the week after a leak, we heard that the direct quote from our user our team received, this is one example, after they received our messaging about how we protect their data privacy, and I'll read this for y'all. Thank you for clarifying. I actually wanted to delete because I've been nervous about the data being sold with everything going on. I'll keep my account now that I have some clarification from you about this. It's been really helpful for me since I started using it, so I'm glad I don't have to delete it. Thank you for your help. So there are still so many unknowns, but on the ground, some people are responding in real time to our proactive actions, and this felt rewarding to see some of the fear and confusion turn to gratitude.
Okay, so that was a lot. What did we learn from all of this? When we take a step back, what were the lessons that we can apply and that you all can hopefully apply as well? So most importantly, centering the user should be your North Star. True product innovation happens when the user is at that nexus of all of these other sort of levers and factors, namely communication, user research, customer experience, and product decision-making and prioritization. So all of those factors are sort of swirling around the central user. It is a very tough balance that involves so many things like continual gut checking, user sentiment analysis, agility and flexibility as you learn new information. Some other important things we learned that we might not have expected. Not having a hierarchy can be really, really important. Trusting the experts on their skills, and like we said earlier, bringing those experts in and bringing them in early. And sometimes time will not be on your side, and that is a very important factor that you will have to weigh. So, okay, remember the gender data gap that we talked about earlier and how complicated that balance is? It's a lot to keep in mind, all of these things. It's really complicated, and yet we think it should be and needs to be that complicated and complex. We think that striking the right balance of data collection should always be a thoughtful product exercise. So we hope this gets your wheels spinning. And speaking of exercise, we are ready to dive in.
That's right. And we know that was a lot to process, so we're just going to take a quick pause here, shift gears a little bit, because you heard about our team's experience last year and the data gender gap. So keeping that in mind, the interactive portion, we're actually going to recommend that you get out a piece of paper and something to write with. We're going to have 2 different activities as well as a short reflection period to share at the end. So at the sharing part, we'll encourage you all to turn your cameras on if you want, come up to the stage and share some ideas. So we'll remind you again when it's time. All right, for our first activity, we're going to do a user research exercise. Folks might have done this before, but we're going to do some empathy mapping. So, like I said, grab some paper and something to write with if you have it handy, or if you want to do this later or bring it back to your teams, you also can. So you're going to fold your paper so it's divided into 4 quadrants, looking like the screen up there, labeling the quadrants with says, thinks, does, and feels. We'll give folks a second. All right. We're going to do this exercise with you as well. So here is the exercise. Imagine you're a user downloading a new health app for your chronic condition that requires daily monitoring. The more data you give the app, the more it helps you, but you also have some concerns around data privacy. And just for context, so we're all on the same page, a chronic condition is defined broadly as conditions that last 1 year or more and require ongoing medical attention or limit activities of daily living, or both, according to the CDC. Some examples are diabetes, polycystic ovary syndrome or PCOS, or Crohn's. And for context, 6 in 10 adults in the US have a chronic disease, and 4 in 10 adults have 2+. So this app would widely help many people. So pretend you're the user. What are you seeing, thinking, doing, and feeling about your data privacy as you download the app? That's going to be super helpful for your health journey. And for this exercise, we want to limit to health tracking, but of course, consider your own products or other industries. What's the level of data someone can or should give you before they're uncomfortable? So we'll take just a couple minutes to brainstorm, jot down some ideas, turn on some music if you like.
And we will call you all back in 3 or 4 minutes.
As you're writing down on your paper, also, if you feel comfortable, feel free to write in the chat some of these things that you're putting in the quadrant and let us know if that's the says, thinks, does, or feels, what you think that your user might be doing. All right, Miriam, you think we should move on to the next one?
Yep, perfect. I got caught up in the exercise myself.
Oh, someone wrote, I'll only share essential information to achieve the goal. That's great.
Yep, feel free to keep writing. We have a second part that will build upon this, and then our third activity will be to share and come up on the stage. So we have multiple opportunities to continue. So let's keep moving. So for the second activity, like I said, we're going to build upon what we just did. So you can either literally build upon like we have in the picture on the same page, or get a new piece of paper, whatever feels right. So in this exercise, you're taking a different angle. You are no longer the user, but the product leader. Imagine you are a product leader who's building this new health app that helps users monitor chronic health conditions. Pick one thing that you wrote under each quadrant. So one does, one thinks, one feels, and one says. What product decisions can you make to address each one of those things, ensuring that the user has confidence in your product? So we know that striking the right balance here is going to be key, because as from the product perspective, your app is optimized the more you ask of the users, potentially, right? So think about all the different areas that a product might touch that may or may not be technical as you think about, as you're brainstorming this activity. Maybe it's in the design, the UX, UI. Maybe it's email communications to the users, customer support, different product features that you choose to prioritize or maybe put front and center within the app, the UX writing to provide clarity, transparency. And then if you're sort of looking for a place to start with this prompt, you're a little bit stuck. Do you have any apps on your phone that you feel have addressed your concerns on data or privacy, or that have had really good communications to you as a user? And what do they do specifically? So think of those examples if you need. So we'll give this 4 minutes or so, and then we will call you back.
And again, if you want to share what you're writing down so that other folks can have some more insights, feel free. Oh, this is great. So Kate said feels could be anything from anxiety and stress, but also feeling optimistic about better health outcomes. That's great. Lori feels anytime a user is asked to provide personal info, they feel vulnerability. As the PM, address the value they'll get in response to right at the moment they're asked to share it, so they can assess the ROI of sharing and determine whether that level of vulnerability is worth it.
That's so interesting. Yeah. Okay, we'll give it 2 more minutes. Okay, I know you're probably still working. Feel free to keep going, but would love to get into this final portion, which is the sharing and reflection. So if you're interested in turning your camera on, I believe Myra can help bring people up to the stage. We would love to see you up here. Even if you just sort of want to show your face and you might not want to talk and unmute, would love to have you up. I think we can get a dozen or so people. So we know there isn't much time left. I think we have about 5 minutes or so, and we could spend hours discussing this, as I'm sure you all could as well. So this is just the tip of the iceberg, a little teaser. We have some initial questions here to, again, kick us off, but would love to hear anything that you want to share about this. But so some questions to get us going are: what insights arose from your empathy mapping? What contradictions did you discover between the user portion and the product leader priorities? And what are some immediate actions that you would take in the short term as both a user or a product leader? So would love to get people up, would love to get the chat going. We can share. I can also share some stuff that I wrote.
All right, if folks want to introduce themselves and let me know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Marcia?
Hi, I'm Marcia Shapiro. Nice to meet everyone. Thank you for all that you do. And I'm excited to be at the conference.
Thanks so much. Did you want to share?
Sure. So, you know, I don't have the specifics written down. Didn't have any paper handy, but I will call out that typically it all comes down to some trade-offs, right? And any organization, and I'm assuming you have this as well in your organization, would want to go through a prioritization framework for evaluating the user input that you're getting, marrying that up to what is feasible from a product development perspective, what estimates you are putting together, et cetera. But most importantly, what framework you have to evaluate your overall business company objectives. And in this case, I know you have overall objectives of that you have to follow just as any company might. So I think that's where that would fall in terms of marrying the two.
Yes, it is always a dance. I think we have one other person on here. I don't know if you'd like to share or introduce yourself. or not, no pressure. Well, I can share something, and then would love to hear if other people have. So I did this as well, and one thing that immediately stuck out to me, because this is something that I do myself, is one thing that I would do as a user is skip the privacy policy because it's too jargon heavy. And so when thinking of, from a product builder perspective, how can we make it, one, clear language and actually something that is informative and accessible to a user, and then two, create make it so they can't skip it, make it a required read before they enter the app. And I've seen that done before. And, in general, there's a lot to be said about the opaqueness of privacy policies. So that is, I think, something that I would immediately do, make it short and sweet. And I don't know if anyone has had any positive experience with privacy policies and being super readable. I would love to know that, because I have not really seen many, but that seems like an easy win. Anyone else want to write anything in the chat? I know we just sort of threw this all on you, so no pressure at all to share. And I think someone asked if this will be available. And I believe so, yes. And I believe that if the recording should be available, but also the slides should be as well. So we would love to have you all take this back to your team. And I will close it out.
Oh, I see one more person in case they want to share.
Hi.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Janavi. I'm a product manager at Salesforce, and I have worked in privacy in the past. So this session was super interesting. Thank you for everything that you shared. So as I was going through this exercise, I was thinking about my dad, who is diabetic. He's a heart patient. So I thought about him as a user and how he would use such an app. And one thing that I've seen is that they would like to have some sort of graph or visualization to be able to track their progress and see if their condition is improving over time. And so something that would be helpful from a privacy perspective is letting them know what exactly is the information needed and how is that going to help their goal or their job to be done. In one sense, is how is it going to impact, let's say if they input their blood sugar levels, is that going to be helpful to them to be able to track their end goal, for example, and only making sure to collect that information and letting them know that this is the only information we need from you. And the other one is a little bit, it can constitute sensitive information, but something like medicines, right? Being able to have reminders for taking medicines and making sure that you provide that assurance that this information will be protected. So I think as a user, that would be very helpful. And as a product manager, these are decisions to think about while making that available.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Hearing your personal experience also is something that we talk about on our team all the time, and especially transparency is key in centering the user, remembering personal stories, like so thoughtful, so intentional. That's great. And we really appreciate that to close this out. So thank you so much for sharing. We just want to say thank you all for everything that you shared, the good insights and tidbits. We hope that this gets your mind expanding and you take back some ideas to your teams, maybe even create ideation sessions based on the exercises we did together today. So our slides will be available through Women in Product. Speaking of Women in Product, thank you so much. A huge thank you for having us, all their staff, and making this workshop run so smoothly. Our moderator, Myra, and of course our colleague, Ambry Molitor, for holding down the chat for us. So get in touch with me and Miriam on LinkedIn or message us here, set up a meeting with us. We'd love to keep the conversation going, and we'll see you around in Women in Product. Thanks and take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, everyone, for attending this session. Next up, you can head over to the Salesforce Wellness Break that is happening right now for a mini break. And then please tune back at 2 o'clock for our next round of talks. One of them is called Fertilizer for Your Remote Product Team, Growing Performance from Afar. Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.